What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter. This is my reaction video to the divisional round of the 2013 NFL playoffs. If you couldn't tell by the sound of my voice, I do have a touch of the creature, a touch of this cold that's going around. I'm not used to getting sick this frequently, so I do apologize. Bear with me while we get through this one, and hopefully I'll have this sorted out before the conference championship video, which is coming up later this week. To get it out of the way right away, I was 6-6 in the divisional round here to leave myself with a respectable record, barely respectable, but still respectable, of 14-10 so far in the playoffs. That's straight up against the spread and over-under. Straight up, I was only 2-2 this week. Against the spread, I was only 1-3. And over-under, though, luckily, I was 3-1. So I did pretty good on the over-under, but still needed to be better in some other areas. So 6-6, 14-10 overall in the playoffs, and here's my impression of the games. We'll start with the shocker of the playoffs so far, which was the Baltimore Ravens going into Mile High Stadium in Denver, defeating the Broncos 38-35 in overtime to move on to, I believe, their third AFC championship game in the last 5 years. Now, on the money line in this game, I had Denver, so unfortunately that didn't work out. On the spread, I actually took Denver with the points, so I took Denver minus 9.5, so unfortunately that didn't work out either. Over-under, I did have this game going over 46, so I was 1-2 on the official predictions for this game. Taking a look, comparing the quarterbacks, Joe Flacco had a very, very good game, which is, of course, bolstered by that last weird, stupid Hail Mary that never should have actually worked out, but ended up working out. Flacco, 18 of 34 for 331 yards and 3 touchdowns. Take a look at Peyton Manning. Manning was 28 of 43 for 290 yards, also put up 3 touchdowns, but did have 2 uncharacteristic interceptions, and you can say all you want about Peyton Manning's career record in the playoffs, which now sits, I believe, at 9-11. But, I mean, it's still Peyton Manning. It's still going to be uncharacteristic of the dude to throw up 2 picks. Comparing the running backs, Ray Rice actually saw the bulk of the action in this game, carrying the ball 30 times, putting up a $131 on the ground, and punching a touchdown in. You take a look on the other side, Knowshon Moreno was relatively limited in the game, only had 10 touches for 32 yards, but Ronnie Hillman saw quite a bit of action, touching the ball 22 times on the ground, picking up 83 yards. We compare the wide receivers now, and it wasn't so much about bulk receptions for Baltimore's wide receivers, it was more about big strike ability with these guys. Torrey Smith only had 3 catches, but put up 98 yards and 2 touchdowns. Torrey Smith was burning Champ Bailey all game long. And again, we mentioned it, Jacoby Jones had 2 catches, but put up 77 yards on those 2 catches, and that late touchdown, which tied the game, ended up sending the game to overtime. Anquan Bolden also chipped in 71 yards on 6 receptions. You take a look at the Denver side of things, it was the usual suspects for Denver. Eric Decker led the way, 6 catches, 84 yards, and touchdown passes to Demaryius Thomas, Brandon Stokely, and Knowshon Moreno. On the defensive side of things, it was a typical Baltimore Ravens defensive game, aside from, all the points they gave up. But Baltimore had 3 sacks, 2 of them coming from Terrell Suggs, 2 interceptions, both coming from Corey Graham, and Ray Lewis, almost seeming to be the ageless Ray Lewis, with 17 combined tackles in this game. That is a Ray Lewis game. You look at the Denver side of things, Denver, with that prolific pass rush that they've had all season, only recorded 1 sack. That was from Von Miller. Miller also chipped in with 9 tackles to lead the way for the Broncos, so he was definitely their best player on defense. Take a look at the X factors in this game. We talked about Baltimore being an average road team, and I guess when you give up 35 to a team when you're in their house, you can still probably only call them an average road team, but Baltimore did what they had to do to win the game. They caught some breaks on offense, first of all, because Denver's defense has not really looked that bad in a game in a long time. So yeah, they gave up 35 points, but they got a couple of turnovers, those couple of Corey Graham interceptions, and Baltimore Ravens defensive football in the last couple of years has really been predicated on takeaways. So they got a couple there. They got the sack numbers that they needed to get to Peyton, who was not sacked very much all year, really. So, well, yeah, they gave up 35 points, but they did what they had to do to play their game and ended up winning it. And really, again, I really will say that last touchdown play, I mean, they honestly did get lucky on it, because that was just horrendous defense by whoever was trying to cover that pass. Like, it was just, I don't know, it was just bad. We talked about Denver being a dominant team at home, and again, they put up 35 points, but they just did not get it done defensively. This is not a defensive unit that should have given up 38 points to the Ravens. No disrespect to the Ravens offense whatsoever. The third X factor, I talked about Denver really being what Baltimore was during their heyday, but with a much better offense. Clearly, this game displayed that the teacher is still the teacher. I mean, Baltimore took everything that Denver could throw at them offensively, and they still found a way to win. Baltimore is moving on to the AFC Championship game, but who are they going to face? The 2 versus 3 playoff game in the AFC saw the Houston Texans travel to New England to play the Patriots. The Patriots won this game convincingly, 41-28. AFC Championship game of Baltimore traveling to Gillette Stadium to play New England. I was 3-0 predicting this game. I had New England on the money line. I had New England to cover their 9.5 points, and I had the game going over 47.5. All three of those things happened, so 3-0 for me. Taking a look at the quarterbacks, Tom Brady had a very Tom Brady game. 25 of 40, put up 344 yards and 3 scores. 25 of 40. Where might I have seen or heard that number before? Oh yeah, it was his exact season average that I mentioned in my previous video. I thought that was kind of cool. I was like, well, you know, his average game is about 25 for 40, and then that's exactly what he puts up against Houston. So I thought that was kind of cool. Matt Schaub on the other side, 34 of 51 for 343 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. What really strikes me there is New England forced Matt Schaub to attempt 51 passes. That's too many passes for Matt Schaub. Not that he's a bad quarterback, but it's just too many passes for Schaub. It also strikes me that Brady got 1 more yard on only 25 completions than Schaub got on 34. Schaub averaged around 10 yards a reception. Brady obviously averaged quite a bit more than that. Comparing the running backs, we had Stephen Ridley, who actually played quite a good game. 15 carries for 82 yards and a score. And then from out of nowhere, Shane Vereen had a phenomenal game. On the ground, he carried the ball 7 times for 41 yards, so about 6 yards to carry, punched in a touchdown. We'll hear more about Shane Vereen later on. Arian Foster on the other side had a very typified Arian Foster day. He touched the ball 22 times. Put up 90 yards and punched it in for the touchdown. What you're going to notice there, and what we'll have to talk about again in the X Factors, is Arian Foster did not crack 100 yards. We know Houston's track record when Arian Foster does not crack 100 yards. We compare the wide receivers, and for the New England Patriots, it was, you know, business as usual. It was New England Patriots football. Wes Welker had 8 receptions to put up $131 through the air. Aaron Hernandez, 6 catches for 85 yards. And then Shane Vereen again. Caught the ball 5 times for 83 yards and 2 touchdowns. We look at the other side. We look at the Houston Texans, of course. Andre Johnson leading the way. 8 catches, 95 yards. Owen Daniels, they really used him very well and very frequently in the playoffs. 9 catches for 81 yards. Arian Foster also caught the ball 7 times for 63 yards and a touchdown. On the defensive side of things, this wasn't exactly a defensive struggle, considering they put up 69 points. New England did not sack Matt Schaub, but they did manage to disrupt things on defense. You had Rob Ninkovich, who had the interception of Matt Schaub. You had, I want to say his first name is Marcus, but you had Dennard, who forced the fumble. You had Aqib Talib, who led the team with 10 combined tackles. So New England might not have gotten the sack numbers or necessarily the pressure on Schaub, but they did affect the game defensively. You take a look at the Houston defense. They only picked up 1 sack on the game. Of note, Danielle Manning, 216 return yards in the special teams game. Take a look at the X factors that we mentioned in the earlier video. The Patriots passing. I mean, Tom Brady, 340 plus yards on just 25 receptions, puts up 3 touchdowns, and he had 4 receivers that had at least 5 catches. So he spread the ball around very well. He knows who his weapons are. He went to his weapons. He made a new weapon out of Shane Vereen. And, I mean, it was a typical Tom Brady game, and Houston honestly had no answer for the Patriots passing game. And again, as I mentioned it, could the Pats stop Arian Foster? Foster hit his season average on the ground, but he did not top 100 yards. Now, yes, he was very effective in the pass game. He did have a receiving touchdown. So Houston was getting him involved in the game as much as they possibly could. Because if you look at it, that Foster touched the ball 29 times for $153 with his receiving yards. But we're talking strictly about yards on the ground. And when Arian Foster puts up 100 yards, Houston is 9-0 this year. He didn't do that. Houston didn't win. And X factor number 3, I talked about J.J. Watt, how disruptive J.J. Watt can be on the defensive side of the ball for Houston. J.J. Watt was held ineffective again and was not allowed to influence the game. He only had 4 tackles and was in on half of a sack. New England ended up rolling in a game that was not overly in doubt for the majority of it. We moved to the NFC, which saw the Green Bay Packers travel to San Francisco to play the 49ers, and it did not go well for the green and gold. San Francisco convincingly beats Green Bay by 2 scores, 45-31. Now, on the money line in this game, I had Green Bay. Honestly thought Green Bay could pull that win off. Also took Green Bay +3 on the spread, which means I got both of those wrong. Now, I did have the game going over 44.5 points, so I did end up picking that up. So I was 1-2 predicting this game. We take a look at the quarterbacks. Colin Kaepernick had a great game. Colin Kaepernick, 17 of 31 for 263, 2 scores, and a pick to Sam Shields. Taking a look at Aaron Rodgers, Aaron Rodgers had a good game too. 26 of 39 for 257, 2 scores, and a pick. So they were very, very comparable numbers between the 2 quarterbacks. We take a look at the running game. Frank Gore touched the ball 23 times on the ground, put up a $119 and a score, but that wasn't the story. Colin Kaepernick, 16 rushes for a quarterback, 181 yards and 2 scores. Holy shit. Green Bay had no answer for Colin Kaepernick's feet and legs. On the Green Bay side of things, Djuan Harris had 11 touches for 53 yards and a touchdown, but the rest of the team only carried the ball 5 times for 51 yards. That combined for the team was the number of times that just Kaepernick ran the ball. So, there you go. Taking a look at the wide receivers, Michael Crabtree leading the way for San Francisco. 9 catches, 119 yards, and both of Colin Kaepernick's touchdown passes. The rest of the team went for a $144 on just 8 receptions. James Jones ended up leading the way for the Packers, which makes sense. 4 catches for 87 yards and a touchdown. Greg Jennings put up 54 yards on 6 catches and adding a touchdown. The rest of the team went for a $126 on 16 receptions. San Francisco was definitely able to do a lot more against Green Bay's defense through the air. Defensive side of the ball, San Francisco only had a single sack of Aaron Rodgers, which was done by Patrick Willis. And I think if you would tell Green Bay, hey, after this game in San Francisco, Rodgers is only going to be sacked 1 time, Green Bay probably would have liked their chances. Terrell Brown had an interception, and there were 2 forced fumbles, one by Deshaun Goldson and one by Alden Smith. Green Bay was also only able to sack Kaepernick 1 time. That was by Clay Matthews. Makes sense. Of course, they had that interception by Sam Shields that I mentioned before. Brad Jones leading the way for Green Bay with 10 combined tackles. Take a look at the X factors. The very first one I mentioned was, how is Colin Kaepernick going to react to this being his first ever playoff game, looking across the field and seeing a Super Bowl MVP? Well, Kaepernick wasn't scared. We'll put it that way. Don't be scared, homie. Kaepernick was not fazed at all. 444 total yards. Yep, 444. 4 total touchdowns, and he crushed the playoff rushing record for a quarterback, which had previously been held by Michael Vick. He just destroyed it. It was by at least 50 yards. We take a look at the second X factor. I asked whether Dajuan Harris was a fluke. I don't think Dajuan Harris was a fluke. He didn't have the same numbers in this game that he had in the previous game, but his numbers were still good. Touched the ball 13 times for 64 yards and a touchdown. It was good, but he needed to be more involved. They needed to keep Dajuan Harris more involved running the ball. The third X factor, I mentioned that Green Bay really needed to step up to the big leagues and keep momentum from that win over Minnesota, and they didn't do it. They continue to struggle against top competition, against playoff caliber competition. They've still only had, I think, 2 wins against teams that were playoff teams. I suppose 3 with the actual playoff win. For whatever reason, Green Bay just could not step up to top competition this season. And the last game of the playoffs, the Atlanta Falcons hosting the Seattle Seahawks. Seattle goes into Atlanta, damn near pulls off a comeback for the ages. I don't know what that magic that's around that team this year, but Atlanta proves to be the better team, winning 30-28 on home soil, so they will play San Francisco in the NFC Championship game. They will host that game. Now, on the money line here, I had Atlanta, so I got that one right. Against the spread, I had Atlanta -2.5, so unfortunately, that didn't work out for me, and I did not end up getting that as the game was decided by 2 points. The over-under, this was the only game this week I picked to stay under its number, which was 45.5. It did not do that. It went up to 58 points, so I ended up getting that one wrong too. So I was 1-2 predicting this game as well. Sorry, NFC. Compare the quarterbacks. Matt Ryan, 24 of 35, 250 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 picks. So, maybe a little bit below an average Matt Ryan game, but still a good game. Russell Wilson went 24 of 36, but put up 385 through the air, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Comparing the running backs, Michael Turner had 14 touches on the ground, put up 98 yards, but did not find the end zone. And we look at Jacquizz Rodgers, who I mentioned in the X Factors, and we'll talk about a little bit later. Jacquizz Rodgers, 10 touches on the ground for 64 yards, 6.4 yards a carry. Very good averages for Jacquizz Rodgers. Take a look on the other side. Beast mode, Marshawn Lynch. 16 carries, but he only got 46 yards. They held him to about 3 yards a carry, which is great. He did find the end zone, of course, for a touchdown. Russell Wilson added 60 yards on the ground on 7 carries and also found the end zone. Wide receivers, usual suspects for the Falcons. Roddy White, 5 catches for 76 yards and a score. Julio Jones, 59 yards on 6 catches. Tony Gonzalez, the ageless wonder, 51 yards on 6 catches with a score. So it was really, again, the usual suspects for Atlanta, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later too. Take a look at the Seattle side of things. Zach Miller really leading the way for that receiving corps for the Seahawks. 8 catches, a $142 and a score. Great game for Zach Miller, and Zach Miller is a really underrated tight end. Golden Tate also added a $103 on 6 catches and found the end zone. On the defensive side of the ball, Atlanta had 2 sacks, one from Vance Walker and one from Justin Babineau. Also had an interception on the last play of the game by wide receiver Julio Jones on a deep bomb from Russell Wilson into the end zone. And they had a forced fumble from, I believe his first name is Sean Weatherspoon, who also added 8 tackles. Seattle was not able to sack Matt Schaub, and we'll talk about that as well. However, they did have 2 interceptions in their secondary, one from Earl Thomas, who had 2 picks in these playoffs, and one from Bobby Wagner, who also added on 8 tackles to lead the way for the Seahawks. X factors in this game. I talked about not trusting the Seahawks on the road. To be perfectly honest, the final score in this game is flattering. It's flattering to Seattle. For 45 minutes, this was not a close game. This was 27-7. X factor number 2, talked about Seattle's pass rush. They were not able to sack Matt Ryan. They were not able to put much pressure on Matt Ryan. And again, they were saved there by their great secondary, which is very good coverage, and they got a couple of interceptions out of it. And if they would have had Chris Clemens, they would have been able to put more pressure on Matt Ryan, and maybe would have caused maybe another interception or more incompletions or something like that. Had they had Chris Clemens in this game, he probably could have made up those 2 points. Seattle might be the one going to the NFC Championship. And the final X factor, we talked about Atlanta's three-pronged passing attack, and those three prongs went for a $186 on 17 receptions and 2 scores. We also talked about Jacquizz Rodgers. I expected to see a lot of him. 12 touches for 72 yards. He was able to be a difference maker, covered almost 3/4 of a football field just on his own. So he was able to be a slight difference maker in the offense. So they got Jacquizz Rodgers going, as I said they would. They ended up winning the game. So that's it. That's my reaction video to the divisional round games. My video for the conference championships is going to be coming out later this week. I got a busy week. We got a podcast to do. Nick and I are doing our first ever wrestling podcast. Please go over, follow our YouTube channel, youtube.com/user/noholdsbarred-podcast. So we're starting the wrestling podcast this week. We've got the next episode of the No Holds Barred podcast, which comes up next Monday. That's it for me, Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, and God bless football.